Hey everybody, welcome back to the Overwatch channel on YouTube. I'd like to thank everybody who subscribed to my channel. Boy, there's over 700 people now. I can't believe it. I really appreciate it. I didn't think I'd get over 100 thanks to that plug from White Rabbit that I received at one time. I think that really helped out a lot. I think God Rules mentioned me once also, and I really appreciate that. And I appreciate all your comments. Even the negative ones make me think, I always like to I'm forging to the truth, no matter where it leads. So let's get on with tonight's video that I'm making. I have a theory at the end of this video, a theory about Christianity and the end times. And I appreciate it if you stick around because I think you'll be surprised at what I'm going to say, no matter which side you're on. Even if you're an atheist, this may shock you. So this video will have things that may disturb atheists and Christians alike. And like I said, I'm not about using circular reasoning. I'm not about deflecting away information. I guess you can call me a genuine skeptic sometimes. And I'm just trying to process evidence to the best of my ability without any kind of logical error. And in doing so, I came to a point recently where I realized that I no longer agree with some of the things I've said in my earlier videos. Let me explain that. I think that, as I grew up in a Christian family, I had indoctrination that was so deep in me that I think it was affecting and skewing the way I was looking at some data. I didn't realize that until recently. I became aware of things that I put in the back of my mind that bothered me. We'll go over some of that today. And I just, there are things in those earlier videos I still do agree with. Well, let me give you an example. There's a video I made, Scientists Know That We're at the Center of the Universe. It gets a lot of comments. A lot of people, they just seem to deflect away from they didn't look at the data. They didn't understand what I was saying. If they didn't understand what I was saying, I guess that was partially my fault. But they could read the data. If they just looked deeply into it, they would see that some of the ridiculous comments that they wouldn't have made them. For example, the most common is the fact that the people try to presuppose that, well, the satellites that they say are seeing us at the center of the universe must be doing that just because that's where the satellite is and it's seeing itself at the center of the universe. And that is complete misunderstanding of what's going on with the Scientists Know We're at the Center of the Universe video. The real information that these scientists are troubled by is that the cosmic background radiation is not random. And there are actually hot and cold areas that shouldn't be there. And they actually draw a visible hot and cold lines that give an X that actually cross the Earth's plane. They call that X the axis of evil. It's an actual axis in the universe that's visible. It has nothing to do with the satellites. It has nothing to do with their position in space. It has to do with the not random universe that we live in. And atheists can't accept that. The scientists that worship scientism instead of actual science, they need to replace that with, insults and jokes, and they try to deflect the data. Listen, this thing about the universe, the Earth being at its some kind of center point with axis lines, was so troubling to these scientists that when the first satellite data was analyzed, they spent millions and millions more dollars and sent up a second satellite. And when that data confirmed the data of the first satellite, they sent up a third with all new equipment, differently engineered equipment, different orbit for the satellite. They did all kinds of stuff, still returned the same data. They just don't want to accept it. And that is not being a skeptic. That is being a pseudo-skeptic. If you want to know what a real skeptic sounds like, check out Alex on Skeptico.com and listen to his interviews. he is a skeptic that questions things but doesn't reject evidence. And, there's that famous Randy guy with his famous reward if you can prove the supernatural to him. And, of course, there's a lawyer, Victor Zamet, if you look at that, that's looked at his reward that you have to sign before they give you the controlled test or whatever. It's impossible to get that. That is not being a skeptic. That's being a pseudo-skeptic. So, atheists. You want to go around acting like you are somehow above the fray because, you don't believe in God and you don't believe in anything except materialism. I mean, that is not a generalization. If you're going to call yourself an atheist, that's the actual definition of it. There really isn't much leeway with atheism, and if you're going to say that you believe in something else, then you're either a deist or you're an agnostic, but you can't be an atheist. Christopher Hitchens, I guess, could be considered an atheist. He just didn't believe in God, any God. Bill Nye is probably an atheist. He believes in Darwinian evolution. Kurzweil, the Google guy that's into transhumanism, he's an atheist. He believes that, I read his book on transhumanism, and it's interesting because as I'm reading a book, I have to chuckle at all the times that he talks about the design of this part of the brain, the design of this part of the human, the way this part of the human being's engineered. He talks about the universe operating as a software program, but nobody designed it and nobody programmed nothing. It's just an accident. You atheists have a real problem, and I think a lot of the anger is directed at religion, and you're somehow conflating religion with God. There is a lot of debates on YouTube that you can watch between an atheist and a Christian, or an atheist and a religion, or religion versus religion. All these debates, after a while, I began to realize that they all operate like the typical thing that Christian truthers mention a lot, and truthers in general. They talk about the Hegelian dialectic. Well, here you have it, right here, wherever you look with these debates. If you break the formula of these debates, either one of these two guys, Bill Nye or Ken Ham, or if he was still alive, Hitchens, or pick your favorite atheist today, or whatever, fundamentalist Christians on the other side, if you break this formula, these people are in big trouble, both of them. Doesn't matter which side they're on. If Bill Nye had to defend evolution against a debate, someone debating him only on the merits of evolution and the evidence that says that, hey, your theory has a lot of problems. Let me show you. And there's plenty of videos out there to show you the problems with evolution theory. Same thing with Ken Ham. In this debate, they both have to deflect, rationalize away problems with their theories or views or worldviews or whatever. And that's not about the truth. That has nothing to do with truth. It's about wasting your time, 2 hours and 45 minutes, watching these two people debate each other. And neither one of them, obviously, are worried about the truth. They're just worried about defending what they believe. So where do you get the truth from? I believe that, you have genuine criticism. I'm going to focus in on Christianity for this video simply because I'm most familiar with it. I grew up in a Christian household. I've read the Bible cover to cover, several different versions, and tried to analyze it as I'm trying to make sense of all this. And the atheist will show you in the Bible many problems. Hitchens was famous for rattling off the top of his head all the atrocities in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. But atheists, you have this Ted TED channel that, has a lot of your stuff on it, and you ban somebody because they have a talk that shows, proves supernaturalism. Am I saying, I hate that when people do that. I'm sorry. I'm going to try not to say that anymore. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. And anyway, if you are interested in the truth, like you claim you are, that you're the rational one, the logical thinker, why are you deflecting away information that proves the supernatural and paranormal? If you listen to the debates interviews that Alex does on Skeptico with people of all different viewpoints, atheists, materialists, Christians, all different types of people on here, you see that they all have part of the truth, but none of them have the whole truth, because when they run into logical problems, they have to deflect, massage data, ignore data, blah, blah, blah. But aren't you people tired of doing that? Don't you just want to know what the truth is instead of having to do all that? I do. That's what I'm all about. So I'm not about clinging on to anything once I see that it's wrong. And I see that a lot of stuff I believed in is probably wrong. Anyway, I want you to listen to a small clip here. This is Bible scholar. This guy actually did a debate once against Hitchens. I watched that one. And he's very good. He's very good. But, I got accused of, you guys could have a drinking game and see how many times I say in this video. I don't know why I'm doing that so often tonight. Anyway, there is a lot of atrocities in the Old Testament, let's face it. But I want you to listen to this clip here as William Lane Craig, who is a Bible scholar and a Christian fundamentalist, and someone who has done pretty well in the debate against Hitchens. He actually is very well spoken. But listen now, I got accused of calling God a liar when the last two videos I posted, I was questioning the validity of the book of Revelation. I was saying maybe this book is just false prophecy. Maybe this book doesn't fit the Jesus of the New Testament, the first four books of the New Testament. If you look at what is actually said in this book, it just doesn't jive. And you can watch those videos. I make those arguments and check out the links below those. And there's going to be a ton of links below this video because I'm going to reference a lot of material for anybody who's interested in actually doing research. But listen to this now. Remember, I questioned the book of Revelation, and some people commented I was calling God a liar because the Bible's inerrant, blah, blah, blah. Listen to this.
Dr. Craig, a roadblock to faith in Christ and to Christianity is something that is often called the atrocities of the Old Testament. And that is when we read the Old Testament account of God's using Israel to judge other nations, literally wiping them out, women, children, animals. People say, how could God do that? How could God commit genocide in that way? How could he take the lives of little children and so on? And we do find, in fact, these stories in the Old Testament. Have you run into that objection?
Oh, yes. And it's one I think that any thoughtful Christian feels himself wholly apart from confronting skeptics. No thoughtful Christian can read these narratives and not find them disturbing, Kevin. I think this is one of the most difficult questions that a Bible-believing Christian faces. How could God command soldiers to go in and kill innocent women and children?
Now, when we look at this, the first thing I guess we would try to determine is, what is the context of these events? So what are some contextual considerations, Philip?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to realize that this is a singular event in the Old Testament. This is not the normal way in which the God of the Old Testament operates. Contrary to what certain people might tell you, the God of the Old Testament is not some sort of moral monster who goes about commanding people to kill women and children. It's the very singularity of these narratives that makes them stand out. These killings tend to be associated with the conquest of the land of Canaan. It's when God calls Israel out of Egypt and now gives them the promised land. And living in this land at that time are certain clans or small nations or tribal groups that are collectively called the Canaanites. There were probably about 7 of these different clans. And what God commands Joshua and the armies of Israel to do is to go in and wipe out these Canaanite peoples, to kill every man, woman, and child, so that the Canaanites would be literally annihilated. And in this way, God gives the land over to Israel as their promised land, their dwelling place. This was the land that Abraham was called to originally, and then Israel went down into Egypt during the time of famine and were there for around 400 years or so before now God calls them back out to the promised land to give it to them again. But that means wiping out these peoples that are already living there.
Right off the bat, it seems to go against the grain of our modern sensibilities.
Oh, yeah, I certainly think so, because we have in modern warfare a distinction between civilians and combatants, and it seems morally atrocious to kill these women and children who are non-combatants. And so it does present, I think, a real difficulty for the Christian in reading these narratives, especially, as I say, what's odd is that it's so different from God as you read about him in the rest of the Old Testament, where he's compassionate toward those who are suffering, the downtrodden, the oppressed. He's fair in dealing with other people. He even loves pagan nations. I mean, one of the most remarkable stories in the Old Testament is the story of Jonah, where God sends a prophet to Nineveh, this pagan nation, because he says there are a couple of 100,000 people there who don't know their right hand from their left, and I have pity upon these people. So he sends a prophet to them, even though they're not even Israelites. And so it's so strange to see this narrative in the conquest of Canaan of this same God who is so compassionate and loving and just, ordering these Israeli soldiers to annihilate these people groups in Canaan.
One thing that emerges from this question is that it's an internal question. The question, as the skeptic usually presents it against the Christian, is why would God do this?
Yeah.
And you immediately think, well, wait a minute, if it were God who were doing this, we're talking about the God of the universe here. So it becomes an internal question of why God would do this, as opposed to, is there a God who did this?
Exactly. I think that's right, Kevin. And if you ask yourself, suppose this objection is unanswerable. Suppose the skeptic is able to demonstrate to our satisfaction that an all-loving, all-just God could not have issued such a command. What follows from that? That Christ didn't rise from the dead? That Jesus Christ was not God incarnate? That God does not exist? Well, no, obviously none of that would follow. All that would follow is that God, in fact, did not give such a command as you have recorded in the book of Genesis. Now, that would mean either these stories are simply legends, perhaps myths of the founding of Israel that never really occurred, or else, if these events did occur, then Israel carried away in a fit of national...
Okay. You see what he did there? Did you notice what I was highlighting? This is from a genuine skeptical website, Winston Wu. He's a former fundamentalist Christian. He's not an atheist. Okay, I have a real issue with these people that just want to. It's about the religion. They're attacking religion and conflating everything together. And I don't think the atheist is really concerned about the truth. I think they just want to shield what they're very afraid, I think, of the supernatural, and they don't like it, and they're very angry about it. And instead of trying to understand it, they just go off and attack everything that tries to show them that there's supernatural. On the other hand, if what Lane just said there, I mean, this guy is a professional scholar. You heard what he was saying, right? Now, that is just false. If you didn't read the Bible for yourself, or if you didn't see what I was just highlighting here, these are all referenced. You could see where they came from in the Bible. There's a heck of a lot more going on in that Old Testament than just a group of Canaanites that were killed. And even with that, he's saying, well, if you can't justify it, maybe we'll just have to say the Bible is errant. See where he was willing to go? Do you understand now? And for all these people that were trying to, saying, oh, you're just calling God a liar. No, I'm not. I'm saying this book that was assembled by people may not be everything you think it is. It doesn't mean that there can't be some truth in there. It doesn't have to be all true. You're almost idolizing the book. Some of these King James onlyist people are practically turning the book into an idol. But you see, there's a big problem. I have a big issue with some of this stuff. I can't justify it. Why should 70,000 people die when one guy, King David, messes up? I mean, this is like that mob movie, where the mob boss is there and his top henchman comes in, and then you have the henchman's apprentices, and the boss is mad at the henchman. And instead of killing him, he kills his co-workers, and he says, don't come back, don't screw up again. I mean, here you have 70,000 people killed to punish one man. That's sure, you read the passage. This one's very disturbing. This guy asks God to be allowed to win a battle, and if he does, he will sacrifice first person when he returns to God, and it's his only daughter. And she says, well, you gotta keep your word. You can kind of see where the Gnostics were coming up with this demiurge theory. You can go through this. I'll link to this. Like I said, this is from Winston Wu's website. He also wrote several books about, one of them, it deals with pseudo-skepticism. Another one deals with fundamentalist Christians, which he used to be one. I made it clear in all my videos I believed in a lot of the evidence for the resurrection for Jesus, for the supernatural incident that happened that sparked Christianity. What I don't believe in is that we have it right. Okay? And there's evidence that I can show you if you stick around long enough in this video. So, his whole book is actually free here online, but if you go to this section here, Bible Atrocities, and go down this and reference it, or you can go to some atheist website and see what they're complaining about. This is infidels.org. But this guy was interviewed by Skeptico, and you can see he just wants to reject anything to do with the supernatural. He has a very difficult time dealing with that stuff. Or somebody from infidels.org, I forget who it was interviewed once by Alex from Skeptico. But you go down this list, and yeah, sure, you might be able to justify here or there something, and you might be able to say, well, you can't count the flood because the book of Enoch shows that it was the Nephilim and all that. But see, by doing that, you're saying that there's a missing book in the Bible, which means the Bible is not inerrant because it's missing material. So this whole thing with Bible inerrancy has me confused because the Bible actually never says in it, even if it did, it doesn't mean that it's true, but it never actually says that the whole book is inerrant. It also never says a whole bunch of other stuff that people seem to preach about that they claim that like as if it's in there, but it's not in there. Like, exactly when is God like really against polygamy? Because he lets it run rampant pretty much all the time and throughout the entire Bible, even during New Testament time, people would marry more than one wife. Anyway, that's another video. Go check out God Rules for all the videos about sex in the Bible and polygamy and all that stuff. He does a really great job of analyzing that stuff. And here is Chris White. Now, Chris White did a great video. He shows about ancient aliens debunked, and that video pretty much has nothing to do with being, Christian, but he is a fundamentalist Christian. And on Skeptico, he was just interviewed this week, I think. And let me play for you a small clip here of Chris White's interview with Alex from Skeptico.
and they just either deny it, twist it, or show. You can probably know some of the cases that I'm pointing to. So this whole issue of why we believe what we believe is very interesting to me, and I think it's central to the ancient alien theory, to the Christian apologist kind of line of reasoning, and to the consciousness, extended consciousness, supernatural stuff that we've spent more time on. I think it really is at the core of it, because it really is about belief. When we were talking a minute ago about Michael Shermer and the skeptical community, I could give you example after example where they're confronted with just the kind of evidence that they say they want, peer-reviewed studies, top doctors, and they just either deny it, twist it, or ignore it. And that comes up over and over again. So I like that you're willing to push out there with stuff that you know is going to be unpopular, you know is not going to gain you a lot of fans, and yet you want to advance that. So let's push into that a little bit. And I guess I have to start by saying that the problem I have with a lot of the things that you say about the flood myth is that, again, it seems to immediately go into this apologetics mode, which is, if I just had to listen to the last part of what you were saying about there's this common mythology, and you can point out the different mythologies and all the rest of that, I'm nodding my head like, okay, great. But I know where you're going with it. I think I do. And I think where you're going with it is that these books that you have, that we call the Bible, are therefore the only books that we should rely on for understanding our true nature, for understanding our relationship with anything divine, anything more, God, I guess is what we'd say. And I just think when you really break that down, it just doesn't fly. And I think that that's borne out in the statistics. A recent phenomena of the internet is this idea of crowdsourcing, and that the crowd really knows more than the eggheads in a lot of topics. And I think obviously that's sometimes true, sometimes not true, but I think it is true. And I think if you look at what the crowd says God, yes. 90% say yes. Heaven or an afterlife, again, a huge percentage of the population says yes. But you move in and say, is this one book that we have the sole source of knowledge about that God? The statistics go way down, and a vast majority of people say no, that just doesn't make any sense from all the different data that we've pulled together. So isn't there some wisdom in that? How can we really fit our worldview and back it into this idea? These fragments of books that we found are really the sole source of all the knowledge we ever need to know about God.
Well, there's a lot of things there. First of all, I would say that in terms of epistemology, how do we know what we know? And this whole thing is about truth. And that is the bottom line. There is no other pursuit. And if something isn't true, then you shouldn't believe it. This idea of faith, blind faith, is not a concept in Christianity. It's a modern concept that skeptics of Christianity put on Christians. The Bible doesn't want you to believe anything that isn't true. Paul says, look, we of all men are most pitiable if this isn't true. Christianity is a belief based on things that you can test, things that are empirical. I think that you could sympathize with this, and having a worldview that a lot of people that claim a very scientifically sound worldview would snub at, and you're saying, hey, no, look, I've looked at this, I've talked to the people, this is something that is real. You can be empirical about this, you can test this, and there's something we need to deal with here. And the only difference between essentially your plight there and mine is that we've both looked into our respective fields more than each other. We have presuppositions about the ones that we haven't looked into. the idea of the Bible being, the one set of truth. When you ask people about this, and I've certainly found this, when the main thing out of somebody's mouth is something to the effect of, "We can't trust those books. They've been written over and over by men, and they've changed so much." And I find that people really have no concept of what they're even trying to argue about there. The idea that they've changed so much over time is something that you can test with great accuracy. I mean, if they have changed so much over time, as just about virtually everybody on the street will tell you that they have, it would be the easiest thing on the planet to prove, because there are copies, manuscripts of the Bible from different time periods in different continents that agree within, what is it, like 99.5 or something degree accuracy. That's astounding. No, I'm not claiming the truth of that yet. I'm just saying that, hey, look, that we must agree that these things haven't changed over time, and that was just a starting place. But
let me just try, and I don't want to go down that path necessarily. I mean, we could. It's interesting to me, but I kind of wanted to redirect it in another direction, not to cut you off, but to get your opinion on this, because it's something that we touched on in our email exchange, and I think it's really an interesting point that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that's the supernatural hypothesis. So we had a little bit of email exchange back and forth, and at one point you said, hey, I think a lot of the criticisms against Christian apologetics is based from this kind of non-supernatural perspective, basically scientific materialism. It starts with the assumption that there can't be anything supernatural, therefore, so they're kind of doing apologetics on the other side, is that, hey, you've never seen anything supernatural in your life, have you, folks? And everyone's thinking, well, yeah, I have, but they're nodding their head, yeah, there's nothing supernatural. And then from there, they go, well, then how can you trust any of these things that these people are telling you? I want to go down that path, and because it's something that doesn't get talked about. So let's assume the supernatural, if you will, because in the work that I've done, in terms of consciousness, parapsychology, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, wherever you look, you find what you could call supernatural. I think it's a natural fact that we have to deal with. I know that's a contradiction in terms, but the evidence strongly suggests that this does happen. But if we incorporate that in, how does that fit into then your worldview? Because it seems that Christians have as big a problem with that part of it as they do with kind of overcoming the skeptic who says, no, nothing supernatural could ever happen.
Well, I think that the baseline here, again, is still epistemology. How do you know what you know? If something is supernatural, and I would certainly agree with just about everything that you're studying and have on the show, that they exist and there's a real phenomenon there, that's really not the question. Whether or not it is existing, I think probably one of the reasons we are all sort of struggling about what is true is because we tend to find something supernatural that happens. Hey, wow, this supernatural thing is genuinely real. Hey, everybody, come and look. Everybody see this supernatural thing is genuinely real. And they sort of give it or presume that whatever theology is presented in that supernatural context is therefore true. Just because it's supernatural doesn't make whatever it is being true. And a good example would essentially be a lot of the channeled material and different things that happen in that regard. People can channel a genuine entity. I don't know where you're at with that. Some of the stuff in automatic writing, and you can actually see that these entities are saying something that's not true. For example, the 2012 stuff all started with channeled material, and they say stuff about
Okay, this is a really good interview. If you want to listen to it, I'll link to it. Check out Alex's Skeptico channel if you haven't already. It's really good. Anyway, if you listen to the whole thing, Chris White is a really smart guy, but he just ends up doing what I was doing, which is using all this circular reasoning, and you're trying to make it all fit. God has to fit into this definition that you have if you're whatever religion you are, and you have this book, the Bible. It tells you that it has to be X, Y, and Z, this formulaic thing. But in reality, now I have a playlist called Jesus on my channel. It's got a lot of stuff from Dr. Gary Habermas. If you watch my other videos, you'll see me referencing him for several things. But I got to point something out here. He is very narrow in where he looks, because I think that he knows. I don't know. He's never said this, but I believe, based on his method, that Dr. Gary Habermas knows that he can't drift too far, he can't go into the Old Testament. That he debates in a very narrow area. It's strictly about Jesus and his resurrection. Other things he does is research near-death experience. Now, the near-death experience simply proves the supernatural, and that's what he'll say. It simply proves supernatural, doesn't prove any worldview or religion. And when you ask him about what happens, okay, so you have the verifiable stuff that they, skeptics will bend over backward, twist themselves into pretzels, the pseudo-skeptics, I should say, and atheists and people like that. When you have a person that's coded in a hospital room, they have an out-of-body experience, and they witness something somewhere else that is verifiable, and then they get revived, and then they're able to tell a witness this, and then it's verified, and there's no way that they could know except if they were there, and that becomes a problem for the atheist, problem for the pseudo-skeptic, because they got to push that away. They can't have a consciousness surviving death. Really bothers these people for some reason. And then you have Habermas, who knows that after that point, they go into the tunnel, they go into the light, whatever happens after that point. There is no religion that's supported by what these people come back with. There's even a case of a Christian woman I found on the Near-Death Experience Accounts channel on YouTube, where she says, she was expecting certain things because she's a Christian and she had a belief system that, she really believed in. And when she gets to the other side, she finds out that it's nothing. Oh, this isn't what I was told. It's actually better than what I was told, but it's not what I was told. You have atheists. Atheists have genuine near-death experiences. They don't go to hell. Dr. Eben Alexander, classic example. I mean, here's a neurosurgeon, atheist. He's not atheist anymore, but he comes back, and you have that pretty much almost universal message they come back with. It's all about love. It's not about religion. But you have fundamentalist Christians that know the only way to get to heaven is this way. And you may have a Muslim with her faith, and the only way to get to heaven is this way. God's just not playing along with those rules, from what I can tell. He doesn't care about our books and stuff. Just going to do whatever God's going to do. And I'm not saying God's a he or she or whatever, the source, whatever you want to call God, or a duality maybe, I don't know. But it's certainly not what these religions try to tell us, and it's certainly not what atheists try to tell us. But I'll tell you one thing. There's a lot of evidence that, intentions and prayers, and if you're in the occult, they use spells, but it's all the same principle. You're praying or you're casting a spell, you're putting your intentions out there, and sometimes God or the universe or whatever responds. I mean, that's been documented. Group prayer studies and stuff like that. So what is really going on? This channel here, Superhuman Institute on YouTube, has a lot of great documentaries and interviews with former CIA people that were involved in their remote viewing program. There's even an awesome lecture here by a former operator in this field, and it's fascinating. It's 58 minutes. I'll link to this channel. You can check out some of this material, especially atheists who don't want to believe the worldview. Now, Chris White, and a lot of other people, Vigilant Christian comes to mind. It's Satan. Everything's Satan. Satan, Satan, Satan. You have Satan all over the place. You're starting to sound like the church lady from Saturday Night Live sometimes. As a matter of fact, it almost becomes to the point where they're making Satan more powerful than God, the way they talk about this stuff. I mean, some of it, yeah, there seems to be some evil entities out there. There's no question about it. But again, it doesn't fit that mold exactly. And you do have cases. Rob Skiba, I think, was in an interview some time ago. I don't remember who he was talking to. He was talking about entities and stuff like that, and in encounters with some that do not flee when you invoke the name of Jesus. They kind of laugh at you. Doctor, I forget what her name is. Famous UFO investigator from the 90s. She died. Carla Turner. She died in a cancer, I think. She'd written a few books. Also said the same thing in a lecture I was watching her. She said that there's cases where people invoke the name of Jesus, these aliens flee. Cases where they don't. So you see Chris Weitz' narrow view. If you listen to his whole interview, he believes in this extremely rigidly narrow view, but sometimes that just doesn't work, doesn't apply. You can find holes in all these theories and conclusions people come up with. The Global Consciousness Project, I'll have a lot of links for you guys to look at. I've been doing a lot of reading of books and stuff like that, but these are links. I've mentioned this before at Princeton University. And you can look up Gary Habermas, and there's other videos where I show you how miracles have been documented even in modern times, but medical documentation. There's a scientific journal for near-death experiences if you want to read into that. A lot of stuff requires you guys to do the homework. Because if you're just listening to me on YouTube, you're really not getting it. You need to really dig down and figure this stuff out. The Global Consciousness Project shows that when people focus their attention on things, seemingly random events change. Okay, quantum physics tells you that. Observing something changes it, measuring it affects it. You can. Obviously, we're all connected somehow. Okay, so you have a billion. There's so many Christians in the world of different types, and that's another thing. A logical problem I had is the one true religion can't even agree with itself. I mean, you have the post-trib people, the pre-trib people, and now I'm saying, hey, there's neither, because the Book of Revelation isn't even true. If you look at it, it's not what you think it is. And you have, and I'm sorry to say this stuff, and some people are going to be offended. They're going to be so mad at me because I'm disrupting their bubble or whatever. But, okay, so you have, where was it now? Book of Revelation. Did you know that there's all this papyrus for the Book of Revelation doesn't even have the number 666 for the number of the beast? It has 616 as the number of the beast. And there's plenty of, what about that? Could you imagine if they find more old papyri from before the translators, like the King James and stuff, and it's the wrong number? This is the inerrant Bible we're talking about right now. You have all kinds of problems with Book of John, textual criticism over the very part that you get this whole Trinity thing from. One of the foundational quotes in 1 John 5:7-8. It looks like it was added in the 1500s. You have the story where Jesus says, he who is without sin cast the first stone, when he's helping the woman. Look into that, textual criticism. That was added in. It's not in any of the earlier manuscripts. Book of Mark, first one. That's the oldest one. All scholars agree on that. So you have John, that's like 125 AD. You have Mark, maybe 60 AD. if you were to compare Mark and John, and you have all the doctrine coming from John and Mark, the earliest manuscript stops at 16:8. 16:9 and after is, if you look at it, added, you have a completely different doctrine now if you were to just use Mark. And if you stop at 16:8, which is where it looks like the original manuscript stopped at, and then they added some stuff later, to make it. John gives a lot of authority to these churches. You have a diversity of original Christianity in the first century. They're all over the place. All kinds of theories and beliefs. Obviously, something really big happened. And Habermas knows that. He's focusing in on that particular time, trying to prove the resurrection. Shroud of Turin, you can be an atheist and a skeptic, pseudo-skeptic, because you have to be a pseudo-skeptic to not acknowledge that is a supernatural artifact. I'm not saying that it conclusively proves anything about Christ or Christianity, because there's nothing specifically written on it or anything, but the evidence for it being something supernatural is through the roof. Carbon dating's been thrown out years ago. They know that that's invalid. They can't carbon date that cloth because of all the bacterial contamination from people touching it and fungal growths and plant life that's deposited on it. But if you look at all the facts with that Shroud of Turin, you have to be a pseudo-skeptic. You have to push away that data. You can't accept it. So where am I going with this? All right, so you have prayer studies that show that group prayers are effective. You can heal people. There's all kinds of evidence for this kind of stuff. When the occult do it, they call it casting spells. When Wiccans do it, they call it a spell. They're all kind of doing the same thing, but you have different motivations and different beliefs. Obviously, the Christian thinks that theirs is the only way, but they have, Buddhists meditating for somebody to be healed, and the person, gets a miraculous healing, or in a controlled study, they have different faiths doing the same thing, getting similar results. And so, like Habermas, Dr. Habermas he does deflection at that point. He says, well, maybe God answers anybody's prayers that he wants to. But you see, that's not what the Christian worldview says. Christian worldview says that Christianity is the only true religion and that nothing else is true. It's all from Satan, which is kind of ridiculous at some point when you think about the scope of that. But here's my theory, and this just a theory. Show me evidence that I'm wrong, I'll consider it. I am open to admitting I'm wrong. I just did in the beginning of my video. I was wrong about some of the things I said in earlier videos. You have, what, 200 million Christians? 1.2 billion people in one way or another consider themselves Christians. You have the Muslims and you have the people of the Jewish religion, all Judeo-Christian founded religions. They all have end-time prophecies. Christians nowadays are really focused on the end-time prophecies, and they've been in the past too. There's been plenty of time where people were told, oh, this is it, we're in the end times. And things do seem to manifest that seem to say that we are in the end times. But I've got to tell you, I have to think that with all this information from science that says that, people's observations and focus and intentions affect outcome, whether it's on some kind of quantum level or whatever, and you have 1.2 billion, just Catholics, wow. You look at all these 800 million Protestants, you have billions of Christians, right? So out of them, how many millions are focused on the book of Revelation. There must be in the millions. Focused on looking for the end times, watching YouTube videos about the end times, trying to predict the end times. Read that book of Revelation really closely. Look at the death and destruction and torture and tribulation that's in there. Now, consider this. In many religions where they use, say, like, let's use Wiccans for an example. They believe in this rule of three, or the witchcraft. They believe that, if you try and harm somebody, that you're going to get it back on you. And they also believe that and people that have put out spells, or even Christians, like I believe that Christians also do this. If you're doing something from a selfless point of view, from selflessness, the prayer seems to work better. If you're doing it for reasons that are noble and good, that you believe are, I think the prayer seems to be more effective. So you have Christians with these end times. The end times is a disastrous death, torture period. I mean, literally, most of the world gets wiped out. The most horrific way in this book of Revelation. The fact that Christians are focusing on that, praying about it, looking for it, and they're doing it in a paradox way where their intentions are noble and selfless, and they expect tribulation, and they're getting it nowadays. It's manifesting. I believe that is a theory that I have, that the reason that you see these cycles throughout history of end times manifesting themselves and tribulation for Christians is because that's exactly what they're looking for. They're sort of like the universe is sort of responding to your request. I'm having trying to explain this the best I can, and if I'm misspeaking, please forgive me. But I don't know how else to say it. I think that, if you look at the Global Consciousness Project and you look at other evidence on, remote viewing and all kinds of stuff, and go again with the you-knows. I'm not doing this video again. It's too long. Anyway, is it possible that the end times seem to be manifesting because Christians are manifesting the end times through a kind of like prayer? Atheists will not get this. They will reject the supernatural no matter what. They just don't want to see the evidence for it. And Christians, a lot of them, not all, obviously there's all different kinds of Christians. There's liberal Christians, there's so many different types. Some of them may hear what I'm saying, consider it. Other ones will just flatly reject it. And you have spiritual people out there, and they will probably get what I'm saying. I'm sure many people will understand where I'm coming from with this, and may agree with me. I don't know. And there are people that will hate me for it, and people just disagree, and people that will make some intelligent comments down there that will make me think whether or not I'm right or wrong. But like I said with the Earth is the center of the universe video, people just were not getting what the message that the scientists were saying about the axis lines. They keep thinking that it's a center point or something. Well, that's it for this video. I think I've said enough. And I'm going to give you so many links to look at below. It's going to be incredible. Okay. Thanks for watching. And I hope I didn't piss everybody off. And I hope this video was informative, at least. See you. Bye.